Today, we're going to be adding and subtracting rational expressions. Yesterday, we multiplied and divided them. Today, we're going to add and subtract them. And as you might have guessed, it's just like adding and subtracting fractions. So in this case, 2/3 plus 1/2. We'll practice with a fraction before we get to some rational expressions. 2/3 plus 1/2. Well, I got to have a common denominator in order to add these two fractions. The least common denominator is the least common multiple of the two denominators. To find this number, factor both the denominators. 3 is 1 times 3, 2 is 1 times 2. Circle the numbers that are in common. Write them down one time. Then write all the other numbers that aren't circled down one time. In this case, I circled the 1, wrote it down. I had a 2 and a 3 left over, so I wrote the 2 and the 3 down. And now my least common multiple is whatever 1 times 2 times 3 is. In this case, it's this 6. So I put 6 in the denominator of the two fractions I'm going to be adding together. Well, 3 times what gives me 6? 2 is. So if I multiply 2 on the bottom to get this fraction, I've got to multiply 2 on the top. So 2 times 2. Again, 2 times what gave me this 6? Well, 2 times 3 gives me 6. And so 1 times 3 will go in the numerator of this fraction, which is, of course, 3. So I have 4 over 6 plus 3 over 6, which is 7 over 6. And we're going to leave everything, if you have a fraction like that, we'll leave it in as an improper fraction. So here's a little more practice on finding least common multiples. If I'm trying to find the least common multiple of 12c and 6c squared d, I first factor 12c. If you want to think of a factor tree, you're welcome to use one. You'd end up with 2 times 2 times 3 times c. If I write the least factorization for 6c squared d, it would be 2 times 3 times c times c times d. And then I circle the numbers that are in common. I circled the 2, I circled the 3's, and I circled the c's. So I wrote those down one time. And then I write every other number down one time that's not circled. So here's a 2 that I wrote down, the c, and the d. And when I multiply all this out, 2 times 3 times 2 is 12, c times c is c squared, and d. So the least common multiple of these two terms is 12c squared d. Another example, 14ab squared and 18a squared c, the least common multiple. I'd first factor 14a squared b. That's 2 times 7 times a times b times b. 18c squared. 2 times 3 times 3 times a times c. So the least common multiple would be what I get when I multiply the numbers that are circled one time and all the rest of the numbers that aren't circled one time. So 7 times b times 3 times 3 times a times c, and those are all right there. Well, if I multiply all this out, 2 times 7 times 3 is 126. A times a is a squared. B times b is b squared. And then the c just comes down. So my least common multiple for 14ab squared and 18a squared c is 126a squared b squared c. Here's some more examples using rational types of things. Here, if I want to find the least common multiple between 2x minus 6 and x minus 3, the first thing I do is factor. Both of these terms have a 2 in them, so I factor that out and leaves me with x minus 3. X minus 3 is, if you will, just 1 times x minus 3. So I circle the numbers that are in common. That's the x minus 3's. I write that down one time, and I write everything else down one time that's not circled. So I wrote down the 2, and I wrote down the 1. X minus 3 times 2 times 1 is 2 times x minus 3. So the least common multiple of 2x minus 6 and x minus 3 is 2 times x minus 3. Another example. If I'm trying to find the least common multiple for x squared minus 3x minus 4 and x plus 1, the first thing I do is factor x squared minus 3x minus 4. That factors to be x plus 1 times x minus 4. X plus 1 is, if you will, just 1 times x plus 1. Circle the numbers that are in common, write them down one time. So I circled the x plus 1 and I wrote it down one time. And then I wrote down all the other numbers that weren't circled. And that's really just the x minus 4. The 1 really doesn't do much for us. So the least common multiple of x squared minus 3x minus 4 and x plus 1 is x plus 1 times x minus 4. Well, let's now go practice with some rational expressions. I want to add 3 8p squared r and 5 4p squared over 4p squared r. Find the least common multiple of 8p squared r and 4p squared r. First factor 8p squared r, that's 2 times 2 times 2 times p times r. 4p squared r is 2 times 2 times p times r. Circle the numbers that are in common. That's a 2, a 2, a p, and an r. So I wrote those down right there. And then the only other thing that wasn't circled was this 2 right here, and I put that right there. And now I multiply. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. P times p is p squared, and the r. So my least common denominator is the least common multiple of my two denominators. So I put that least common denominator here. 8p squared r times what gives me 8p squared r? Well, that's just 1, and 1 times 3 is 3. 4p squared r times what gives me 8p squared r? Now, if you factored it down here, you get a hint. It's this 2. So I multiply the 2 times the 5 to get this 10. Or, if you will, 2 times 4p squared r is 8p squared r. So if I multiply the bottom by 2, I got to multiply the top by 2. 5 times 2 is 10. Now all I have to do is add the numerators. 3 plus 10 is 13, and keep my denominator 8p squared r. So 3 over 8p squared r plus 5 over 4p squared r is 13 over 8p squared r. Two more examples for you, and we'll try and make them more difficult than the others. Here I have 3